We live in an age where everything is shared. Your thoughts, your feelings, your stories, your secrets. Put it on the feed. Say it out loud. Show the world you're real. We've been trained to believe that the more we expose, the more we connect, that the more we bleed in public, the more we're accepted, that withholding is weakness, that silence is outdated. But let me ask you something. When did mystery become a flaw? When did discretion turn into shame? When did keeping something for yourself become wrong? Because there was a time, not too long ago, when strength looked like silence, when elegance meant knowing when not to speak, when a woman's power wasn't in how much she shared, but in how much she withheld. And maybe we need to go back to that. Because not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Not every emotion deserves an audience. Not every thought needs to be said. Not every plan needs to be posted. Not every wound needs to be named out loud. Some things lose their meaning when they're exposed too soon. Some truths lose their power when they're passed around carelessly. Some moments, some stories, some depths, they were meant to be kept. Not hidden in fear, but guarded in wisdom. And that's what we've lost. We've confused oversharing with honesty. We've confused attention with intimacy. We've confused visibility with value. But hear me, woman of God. There is nothing wrong with keeping parts of yourself unseen. There is nothing wrong with being private, selective, quiet. There is nothing weak about withholding what is holy. In fact, it is wisdom. Because not every table deserves your presence. Not every person deserves your process. Not every season requires an explanation. And the women who last, the women who walk in authority, in peace, in clarity, they all have this in common. They know what to keep sacred. So in a world that demands you give it all, learn the art of holding some things back. Because there are three sacred things, that no woman should ever give away easily. Three things that should be kept, preserved, protected, not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring what's holy. And the first of those things is your pain. The first thing a woman should always hide is her pain. Not because pain is shameful, not because you need to pretend you're okay, not because you should live in denial, but because pain is sacred. And sacred things should not be handed to just anyone. You see, we've made suffering a stage. We've made trauma a trend. We've made confession a currency. We bleed online. We unravel in group chats. We pour our heart out to strangers, hoping someone will see us. But here's the truth. Not everyone who sees your pain will treat it with care. Not everyone who hears your story is safe. Not every space is holy enough to hold your wounds. Because some will comfort you, yes. But some will use your pain against you. Some will twist it. Some will gossip about it. Some will weaponize it, not out of evil, just out of immaturity. Because the human heart is not always ready to handle sacred weight. And the woman who understands that doesn't hide her pain out of fear. She hides it out of wisdom. She knows how to bleed in prayer before she bleeds in public. She knows how to weep before God before she weeps before people. She knows how to process in silence before she turns it into testimony. Because pain that is still bleeding needs bandages, not microphones. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is heal in private. Let God sit with you in the dark. Let him touch the wound without the world watching. Let him speak to the places no one else can reach. Because when you give your pain to him first, he will tell you when it's time to speak. He will tell you who is safe. He will tell you when it becomes ministry instead of mess. But until then, keep it between you and heaven, not forever, not in denial, but until the wound stops screaming. Because when you expose pain too early, you don't get healing. You get judgment, you get noise, you get opinions. And what you need is presence. His presence. The only place where pain doesn't define you, it transforms you. So yes, cry. Yes, grieve. Yes, feel it all. But choose your audience wisely, because not every room is worthy of your breaking. Not every ear can carry your ache. And a wise woman knows some parts of her story must first pass through the fire before they're ever passed to the world. So the first thing you keep hidden is your pain. But it's not the last, because the second thing you must hide is something far more fragile than your wound. It's your plans. The second thing a woman should always hide is her plans. Not because she's secretive, but because she understands. A dream exposed too early is a dream endangered. We live in a world obsessed with announcing. We announce the vision before it's written. We share the idea before it's tested. We post the plans before we even take the first step, and then we wonder why it falls apart. Because here's the truth. The soil of faith is not the internet. The shelter of a vision is not public approval. A plan is a seed. And a seed doesn't grow on concrete. It grows when it's hidden, buried, watered in silence, tested in the dark. But some of us, we keep digging up what we planted just to show people something is happening. And every time we do, we interrupt what God is building. Because not everyone who claps for you believes in you. Not everyone who listens is cheering. Not everyone who asks is worthy of knowing. Some people ask because they're curious, not because they care. Some people nod with a smile, while silently hoping you fail. That's not cynicism, that's wisdom. And the wise woman knows, my plan is safest when it's in God's hands, not in their ears. It doesn't mean you never share. It doesn't mean you isolate. It means you discern. You discern the difference between support and spectacle, between people who cover your vision and people who consume it. Because premature exposure leads to unnecessary battles. The enemy doesn't need to attack what he cannot see, but once you speak it, he targets it. So guard your plans, not out of fear, but out of faith. Faith that says, I don't need applause to obey. I don't need validation to build. I don't need anyone else to understand before I move. God gave it to you. He didn't hold a board meeting. He didn't take a vote. He whispered it to your spirit. And that's where it should grow. So write the vision. Make it plain. But don't hand it out like candy to every person who smiles your way. Some plans are holy. Some dreams are delicate. Some blueprints are fragile. And when the time is right, God will bring the right eyes, the right ears, the right hands. Until then, build in silence. Move in prayer. Work in faith. Because what you protect in private, God will reward in public. So yes, hide your pain, hide your plans. And next, you hide something even more sacred, your love. The third thing a woman should always hide is her love. Not because she's cold, not because she's guarded, but because she understands. Love, when given too freely, loses its weight. We're told to open up, to be vulnerable, to wear our heart on our sleeve. But what they don't tell you is not every heart is mature enough to carry yours. Some want your love just to prove they can get it. Some want the story without the sacrifice. Some want the attention, not the commitment. And if you offer the deepest parts of yourself to someone who hasn't been tested, you will bleed for what was never built to last. Because love isn't a performance. It's not something you give to be seen. It's something sacred, meant to be discerned, not distributed. The woman who understands this, She doesn't harden her heart. She guards it. She doesn't make herself unavailable. She makes herself wise. Because when you fall in love with potential, you often end up falling apart from reality. When you speak too soon, give too much, hope too loudly, you create attachments with people who haven't earned access. And that kind of love always ends in confusion. But when you keep your love sacred, when you watch and wait and discern, you give yourself the chance to love from strength, not survival. You don't have to guess if they value you. You don't have to beg to be seen. You don't have to wonder if your love is safe. Because you didn't throw your heart at the first sign of affection. You waited to see who could hold it without crushing it. And that kind of wisdom, it saves you from heartbreaks that were never necessary. So yes, feel deeply. Yes, hope boldly. Yes, believe in love. But don't give it all away just because someone asks. Don't confuse chemistry with covenant. Don't call it love just because it's intense. Love is not a flood. It's a river, channeled, focused, directed. And the woman who has learned to guard her love, she is not withholding. She is stewarding. She knows that her love is a gift, not a bargain. And it's not for the careless, not for the inconsistent, not for the confused. It's for the one who proves over time that they can carry it with reverence. So yes, hide your pain, hide your plans, hide your love. Not forever, not out of fear, but until it's time, until it's safe, until it's wise. Because the woman who knows what to reveal and what to conceal walks in power the world can't touch. There is a quiet kind of power, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. The kind of power that walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere, not by volume, but by presence. And that kind of power, it comes from mystery. Because what is hidden draws attention. What is guarded commands respect. What is not easily accessed gains value. We've been trained to think visibility equals power, to believe that unless you're loud, you're irrelevant, that unless you reveal everything, you're fake. But let me tell you, real power doesn't scream. It whispers with authority. It doesn't beg to be seen. It knows exactly when to speak and when to remain silent. The woman who has learned to hold back, to keep certain things for herself, to protect what is sacred, she is not weak. She is dangerous because the world can't figure her out. And what the world can't figure out, it can't control. You see, the more predictable you are, the easier it is to be manipulated. The more exposed you are, the easier it is to be targeted. But when you walk with intentional mystery, when you don't hand your entire soul to anyone with a kind smile, when you keep the deepest parts of you hidden in God, you become unreachable in all the right ways. You're no longer shaped by every opinion. You're no longer rattled by every change in tone. You're no longer desperate to explain yourself because you know the most powerful things are usually the most protected. Diamonds are buried. Gold is locked away. Royalty walks behind a veil. And the woman who understands that, she stops fighting to be understood. She stops oversharing to feel valid. She stops performing vulnerability to get approval. Instead, she lets her peace speak. She lets her restraint testify. She lets her boundaries define what she's really made of, because she's not trying to prove anything. She's building something deeper, something higher, something eternal. So don't let this culture pressure you into exposure. Everything holy has always known how to hide. And what is hidden in God's hands is always safe, always sacred, and always strong. But guarding what's holy also means being cautious about who you let in. Because not everyone in your circle is cheering for you. Trust is sacred, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. And every woman who has lived long enough knows this. Not everyone who smiles at you is safe. Not everyone who listens cares. Not everyone who stays close is loyal. Some people want access, not because they value you, but because they want information to use, to twist, to measure how much control they still have over you. And if you've ever shared something deeply personal only to feel it weaponized against you later, you know exactly what this means. That kind of betrayal leaves marks. It teaches you fast. It sobers you up. But it doesn't have to make you bitter. It doesn't have to turn your heart to stone. It doesn't have to make you suspicious of everyone. It just has to make you wiser. Because trust should not be automatic. Trust should be earned through consistency, through proven character, through time, not charm. And if someone rushes you, pressures you, makes you feel guilty for having boundaries, that's not intimacy, that's manipulation. Because the right people will not demand access to your soul. They'll honor the pace of your peace. They won't ask you to bleed to prove you trust them. They'll sit with you in silence and wait for the door to open, if it ever does. That kind of discernment isn't paranoia, it's maturity. It's knowing that vulnerability is powerful, but only when it's protected. So no, you don't have to explain yourself to everyone. No, you don't have to share your heart just because someone seems interested. No, you don't owe the world a version of your story it hasn't earned the right to hear. Jesus didn't entrust himself to everyone, and you don't have to either. So the next time you feel tempted to overshare, to prove your authenticity, to gain approval through exposure, pause. Ask yourself, is this person safe? Have they earned my honesty? Or am I giving them access because I'm afraid of being misunderstood? Because the woman who walks in wisdom doesn't need to be understood by everyone. She needs to be faithful to what's sacred inside her, and that includes her trust. Because the moment you give away your trust carelessly, you give people the ability to shape how you see yourself. And when that happens, your identity becomes negotiable. But the woman who guards her trust, she remains clear, grounded, unshaken, and that stillness, it speaks louder than any defense. Because sometimes the most powerful move is silence. Words are powerful. They can build, they can bless, they can breathe life, but they can also cut, they can trap, they can expose. And that's why a wise woman is never careless with her words. She doesn't speak just to fill space. She doesn't explain herself to prove a point. She doesn't offer every thought, every feeling, every opinion, because she knows every word is a seed, and not every ground is worth planting in. There's a difference between transparency and strategy. There's a difference between honesty and oversharing. There's a difference between expressing yourself and giving away your power. And sometimes silence is your greatest shield, because silence confuses those who want to control you. Silence disarms those who seek a reaction. Silence protects what you're still processing, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. The world wants a response. It wants you to defend, to justify, to explain. But the woman who walks with God, she doesn't move at the world's demand. She moves at heaven's pace. She knows that not every accusation deserves a rebuttal. Not every insult deserves attention. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Because what you fight to explain today may only distract you from what you're called to build tomorrow. So she chooses her silence carefully, not as a form of retreat, but as a form of discipline. She lets her actions speak. She lets her fruit speak. She lets time and character speak, because the right people don't need long explanations, and the wrong people won't believe them anyway. That's why the Proverbs say, even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent. And if silence can protect a fool, how much more can it empower a woman of wisdom? So don't underestimate the power of saying nothing, not in arrogance, not in fear, but in confidence. The kind of confidence that says, God sees, God knows, God defends, and I don't need to perform. Because there is a stillness in strength, a quiet that speaks louder than noise, a grace that doesn't panic when misunderstood. And when you walk in that, you become unreachable to chaos. So no, you don't need to post everything. You don't need to correct every false narrative. You don't need to prove your side of the story. Just stand. Let silence be your sword. Let your restraint be your defense. Because the woman who learns to say nothing at the right time will never be easily shaken. But silence isn't just about self-protection. Sometimes it's the key to seeing what others try to hide. There's something about silence that sharpens your vision. Because when you stop speaking, you start seeing. And not just what's obvious, but what's hidden, what's real, what's behind the words people say and beneath the masks they wear. Because let's be honest, people can fake words, they can fake interest, they can fake loyalty, they can fake vulnerability, but what they can't fake for long is consistency. And when you're quiet, when you watch, when you let people show you who they are instead of telling you, you'll see the patterns, you'll see the motives, you'll see what's real. The wise woman doesn't rush to react. She doesn't assume based on charm. She doesn't hand over trust just because someone showed affection for a moment. She waits. She listens. She observes. Because time always tells the truth. And when you learn to listen more than you speak, you'll begin to catch things others miss. You'll notice the tone shift when certain names are mentioned. You'll notice how they treat you when no one's watching. You'll notice if they celebrate your wins or silently resent them. This isn't about suspicion. This is about discernment. Because the woman who listens learns. She learns who's safe. She learns where to sow her words. She learns when to step in and when to step away. And the best part, she doesn't need to announce what she sees. She doesn't need to confront everyone who moves sideways. She doesn't need to declare what she's figured out. Because wisdom doesn't always speak. Sometimes it just adjusts. It moves differently. It loves with boundaries. It supports without being deceived. Because once a woman sees clearly, she doesn't need to argue. She doesn't need to explain. She just moves with clarity. And that clarity is her protection. That clarity is her power. So if you've been misunderstood for being quiet, if people have mistaken your silence for weakness, if they've assumed you don't see what's happening, let them. Because your stillness isn't ignorance, it's intelligence. And what you're learning in silence is preparing you to move in wisdom. But all of this clarity, this strength, this protection comes back to one thing: knowing how to keep what's sacred, sacred. And that's where we go next. Not just hiding pain, not just guarding plans, not just observing others, but protecting yourself from the inside out. Protecting yourself isn't hiding, it's honoring what's holy. Because when God places something sacred inside of you, you don't leave it exposed. You don't give it away casually. You don't let just anyone touch it. You guard it. Not because you're insecure, but because you're set apart. See, the world tells women you're only powerful when you're seen. You're only real when you're raw. You're only free when you expose everything. But God says something different. God says, you are a temple. You are hidden in me. You are clothed in strength and dignity. And that kind of woman doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. She doesn't speak just to be heard. She doesn't share just to feel seen. She doesn't give away what's untested. She moves in wisdom. She walks in covering. She preserves the mystery that makes her powerful, because mystery is not manipulation, it's protection. When you know your worth, you don't need to display it for validation. When you know who you are in God, you don't panic when others misunderstand. When you know the weight of what you carry, you don't place it in hands too small to hold it. That's why the wisest women are often the quietest. Not because they don't have something to say, but because they know the value of silence. They don't tell everyone what they're building. They don't announce every step of healing. They don't describe every scar to every stranger. They choose when to speak. They choose when to reveal. They choose when to let someone in. And those choices are what keep them strong, because protection is not about hiding in fear. It's about living with intention. It's about knowing that some things aren't meant to be shared, aren't meant to be explained, aren't meant to be public. Some things are between you and God: your healing, your progress, your boundaries, your joy. And keeping those things protected isn't selfish, it's sacred. So, yes, keep the parts of you that God is still shaping. Don't unwrap what isn't ready. Don't hand over what hasn't been tested. Don't feel guilty for saying, this is mine to carry quietly. Because your life is not a performance, it's a sanctuary. And the more you treat it that way, the more peace you'll walk in, even when the world doesn't understand. But now, we come to the final piece, a reminder, a conclusion, a release. Because after all we've said about hiding, there's one more thing that must be declared. You don't need to be seen to be strong. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be understood to be stable. You don't need to be seen to be secure. Because the strongest women aren't the ones who share the most. They're the ones who protect what matters most. They know what to give. They know what to guard. They know when to speak. And more importantly, when to stay silent. They don't reveal their pain to earn pity. They don't broadcast their plans to feel important. They don't offer their love to anyone who simply asks. They wait. They discern. They move with intention. And that stillness, that restraint, that quiet resolve, it terrifies the world, because it cannot be controlled. It cannot be figured out. It cannot be accessed without permission. That is strength, not in performance, but in presence. The kind of presence that walks into a room and doesn't need to explain itself. The kind that makes people lean in without you saying a word. The kind that makes noise without ever raising your voice. Because when a woman knows who she is, and knows who she is, and knows what's worth protecting, she becomes untouchable in all the right ways. Not cold, not distant, but covered by wisdom, by dignity, by divine discernment. So no, you don't need to post every step. You don't need to defend every decision. You don't need to prove your purity, your plans, or your pain. Just be faithful to what God gave you. Steward it well. And keep what's sacred, sacred. Because your silence is not emptiness. It's evidence. that something deeper is happening, that something real is being built, that something holy is being protected. So here's your reminder. You don't owe access. You don't owe explanation. You don't owe your soul to anyone but God. And when you live like that, you don't just survive this world, you rise above it.